Talking with the experts.
Successful teams have trust at the centre of what they do. In this episode 306, Marie-Claire Ross dives deep into trust leadership.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, I typically start working in leadership teams or with leaders to help them have the right interactions and behaviours to build trust throughout an organisation. And many, really wonderful leaders do trust almost intuitively, but sometimes they don't know the secrets of their success. So it's really important that leaders understand it a lot more deeply and the levers and the things that they can do to build it more efficiently. And one of the things that I unpack in my book, Trusted to Thrive, is the integrated trust building framework, which takes leaders through the main three things that they need to do and some of the interactions behind that to really make it more real.
Welcome to Talking with the Experts. This is where we discuss great ideas to take your business to the next level. How do we know these ideas work? Well, it's because we're talking with business owners who are using these ideas. Business owners who have years of experience and expertise. All things business by business owners for business owners. And now, here is your host, Rose Davidson.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. I'm your host, Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com. Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. You can find it on all good podcasting streaming platforms and on YouTube. And today my guest is Marie-Claire Ross, and we're going to be discussing trust leadership and a little bit about her book, which is entitled Trusted to Thrive: How Leaders Create Connected and Accountable Teams. And as a rule, successful teams have trust at the centre of what they do, and leaders who know how to build a trusted team, a team culture, get their teams into achievement zone and keep them there. And Marie-Claire is going to explain to us how we can do that. Welcome, Marie-Claire, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Rose. It's wonderful to be here.
You are I have a business called Trustology. And you work with leaders and teams to build this trusted team culture that we all strive for. And you work normally with medium and large size organisations from around the world. So tell me a little bit about how you got into this in the first place.
So I used to run a video production company with my husband, and we had staff working across Australia. And we actually discovered that with some of the work that we were doing, we'd employ teenagers to help us, and they would actually film greyhound races. And it sounds really weird, but we found that experienced camera operators weren't very good at filming greyhounds. They're really, really fast, and it needs kind of a different skill to normal filming. So we train up young kids, and I learned that because I wasn't with them all the time, I had to really build this nurturing culture from far away. But not only that, we did tend to have quite a lot of people working with us that were having issues at home, issues with family, just by some weird coincidence. And I really learned that I had to create a very warm, nurturing environment for those teenagers to create the environment for them to thrive. And it really paid off and helped them a lot during times of uncertainty in their lives. But I realized that it was kind of a rare thing to do. I'd worked with a lot of big corporates and helped them with their online induction training. We created really big online training packages, and we go off and film induction training, all those sorts of things. And I realized when I worked with CEOs and executives and middle managers and supervisors, they weren't creating the nurturing environment that I really learned that I had to for my staff. And I realized that trust was really missing in the equation. And so I made the bold move back in 2014 to start a business teaching leaders how to do that.
Yeah, really, it's interesting because especially when you're training young people, and it might be their first position, that if they get into an organisation where they are trusted, or that the organisation trusts them, then it will foster good relations for when they move on to other positions, I think.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because a lot of them weren't necessarily trusted by their own family members. Or, there was one guy that we had who was incredibly smart. In fact, he was too smart. I thought, well, he's too smart for this position, but I can't let him go. This is like a 16-year-old with all these all these things that he'd achieved, like all these awards. And, he's in one of the top consulting firms now, and he's, reached that senior partner position very, very quickly. But you could see it as a 16-year-old, but, giving people the opportunity to have autonomy and really working with them and treating them as a human being really paid off. And it was really lovely being able to help so many people on their first jobs, which can, be quite tough. My first job was at, let's just say, a big supermarket chain. And, and I also worked in a fast food place, and the fast food one, how they treated you was horrible, like horrible.
Yes. I can imagine. Yeah, hang on. So I guess having that basic trust built into a relationship in the very, very beginning helps you to, when you go to other organizations, I guess you could help foster that trust too, because if you've been given that trust and you've received that trust, then you can take that with you and teach others how to do that.
Yeah, and it's contagious. When we see that people trust us, then we're more likely to act in ways that we know that person wants, because we know they're on their side. But it's really interesting as human beings, if we feel that someone doesn't trust us, particularly our boss, we'll act out in little ways. And, we can, there are two different ways. We can either act in a way where we hide what we want to say. We're fearful, we're worried we're going to get told off, so we don't contribute to our full potential. We don't put our full commitment into our work because we don't think we're going to get any appreciation. Or the other aspect is that we can really play up and, be a bit rude to people, not do the full hours work, slack off. And so what we want to do as leaders is create an environment where we create people who, really understand that trust is two-way. A lot, particularly in Australia, we think, well, I don't trust my boss, so he's a dickhead, blah, blah, blah. But, we also, as employees, have to act in trusted ways as well. So a really good leader holds people to a really high standard and, creates the environment for them to reach that standard and be a better person, better human being. And of course, some people aren't ready. You're going to have people that, really don't want to change how they view the world or interact with others, and that's okay. That gives them the opportunity to realize that maybe working in that team or that company isn't right for them, and a chance to look for another job, which is good for everyone.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. And, it's really hard as an employee to not be trusted by your boss, even when you have done all the right things, and then you start saying the things that you think they want to hear, but that doesn't seem to help. You still can't build that trust. So how do we get employers to change their mindset, to foster that trust in the organization?
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, I typically start working in leadership teams or with leaders to help them have the right interactions and behaviours to build trust throughout an organisation. And many, really wonderful leaders do trust almost intuitively, but sometimes they don't know the secrets of their success. So it's really important that leaders understand it a lot more deeply, and the levers and the things that they can do to build it more efficiently. And one of the things that I unpack in my book, Trusted to Thrive, is the integrated trust building framework, which takes leaders through the main three things that they need to do and some of the interactions behind that to really make it more real. And so just to give you, actually, do you want me to just share with everyone what it looks
Absolutely,
like?
yeah,
Because
please do.
I have a model that will just make it a little bit more sensical, if I don't think that's a real word, but it just sounded right at that moment. This is the integrated trust building framework. And you can see that there are 3 main circles. So fostering safety, creating connection, stepping into a meaningful future. So you can also see the questions around the perimeter. And what these questions are is that our brains are always scanning the environment to make sure that we're safe, pretty much according to neuroscience, every few seconds. And so as human beings, some of the questions that we're asking without even realizing it when we're working in a team is it safe to be myself? If I wear these clothes and they don't, people going to tease me. If I make a mistake, am I going to get told off? And we really look to see signs that, we are safe in that environment. Really important for our health and well-being. And then the next one is creating connection. Do I belong here? Do I like these people? Do they like me? Is the work that I'm doing meaningful? Am I being appreciated for the work that I'm doing? And then the third one, which I often find we don't think about, but particularly in my research, I found this to be so incredibly important, is there a future? Is the leader communicating that future of where we're going really clearly? You'll see in organizations, particularly in small businesses or with businesses that are run by founders, if they're not clear on their vision, people go into a lot of gossip and fear, and they don't know what's going on, and they work on the wrong task. So it's really important that leaders have the skills to really communicate clearly where we're going and to make it exciting, but to also help people link what career skills they're going to need, what career development opportunities. We really love it when we know there are learning opportunities in a business and our career is going to be developed and we have the opportunity for promotion. And so when all those things are actually communicated, both verbally and non-verbally, they work to build trust, which is, of course, what is at the center of all successful teams. And you can see the intersections in the middle. So in terms of building safety and connection, this is through leaders doing really good meetings, regular meetings, one-on-ones, really important for building trust. Visibility is between connection and future. So in my research, visibility was one of the things that employees complain about a lot. They need to see their leaders visible. They want to see their leaders come down and see them on the shop floor, so to speak. And, of course, this was really important with remote work, and that leaders are trusting people to do work. And at the same time, employees are visibly showing that they're doing the work. And then there's accountability, which is two-way. Well, all these are two-way. The leader has to be accountable for results, and so do employees.
It's a really good matrix, and and all of those things build trust within an organisation because everyone knows what their role is and they know what their expectations are.
Yeah, and expectations are really key, and being able to communicate that really clearly. I've been doing some work with actually a school, and there's 200 employees, and I've done some research in there. And what's really interesting is that the leader is definitely what I call an achievement zone leader. And she's been in charge of this school since it founded, and it's been around for 12 years. And one of the things that is so clear, so crystal clear for both students, teachers, even parents, and of course, the executive team, are high expectations. Everyone knows that it's about, doing the best you can and going above and beyond. And the teachers and the staff respond to that in a positive way, even though they work so hard and work weekends, so many of them, to get all these high expectations done. They really want the validation and appreciation of the principal, because she has such high expectations for herself and does so much that people want her approval. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, sometimes working just to get the approval rather than, doing the work because you enjoy doing it sometimes can bring about a lot of stress. I think, and especially if there's such high expectations from the leaders themselves, it puts extra stress, I think, on those that follow, because they feel like that if they haven't met it, that they've somehow let the organisation down.
Yeah, and it's so true. And there was a lot of stress. And one of the solutions for that, which is really interesting, a lot of research points to this, and this is in fact what the staff was saying, they wanted more appreciation. So when you balance high expectations with appreciation, it really does lower that stress factor. And it's just day-to-day stuff. We often think that it's about the big things. So we'll do a big ceremony at the end of a quarter or annual, but what staff, and I get this all the time, is they want it day to day. Just say to me, hey, you did a really good job on that report today, or I really liked how you handled that phone call. Just those simple things like that are what people really want. Even more so if you are a high expectation leader and people really want your approval, they really want that validation and acknowledgement.
Well, I think, and I don't mean to downplay it all, but you wouldn't treat your child like that. If they did a good job, you would, give them some praise or some acknowledgement for that. So why don't you do that to your staff?
Yeah. And what was interesting with this principal, she does that and she's amazing at it. But her executive team didn't. And that's where the complaints were. So, it has to be at all levels. You can't have the CEO doing it or, one executive. All leaders need to be doing those small things of acknowledging people every day.
Absolutely. And, and if there's a lot of stress in an organisation and there's no trust in the organisation, and it means you don't want to get up to go to work every day, that brings along a lot of anxiety. It brings a lot of stress. It brings a lot of can lead to depression, can lead to, harmful behaviours. And, leaders really need to step back and look at themselves and say, well, why is this happening? There's got to be a reason. And same moving upwards. So if you're managing upwards, you have to build that trust as well so that it fosters back down.
Yeah, well, it is in so many directions, trust. And what I find interesting is that we often aren't aware of the different, what I call trust forces, because they can either be supporting or opposing. And what I do is I unpack in the book the three forces, which I call macro, meso, and micro. So macro is the broader environment, so trust in the organization itself. So these are both internal and external. We don't have much control over them. So we don't have much control of, weather patterns or pandemics, that sort of thing. We don't have much control of internal changes, a new CEO or new policies, that sort of stuff. We don't have much control of other leaders who aren't very nice. Sometimes we have to learn new skills to work with people in different departments. But a lot of leaders will go, oh, they're just, they're a jerk, so I'm not going to work with them. But that causes more issues. And then we have the meso level, which is where a team leader has a bit more control, where they can actually create that team environment. But of course, you've got different personalities. You've got, people who respond differently to things. And it really involves the leader being adept at not just only building trust one-on-one, but getting people in the team to work with each other. But at the base of it all is what I call micro, and this is foundational, and this is the trust we have with ourselves. And it involves that self-awareness and self-reflection. So you were saying before, surely leaders would know this, but they don't always. Sometimes we just think we're doing a good job, but leadership isn't innate. And in my research and in my work with people, I find that they reflect and review on their leadership every week. And they assess how they're going. They don't just assume they're doing a good job. They either ask for feedback and ask, or they, spend time looking at, how they built safety, how they built connection. Did they communicate the future? Can people hold on to something exciting? And they look at that. And that's what we really need to do. And I find exceptional leaders are very good at that self-reflection piece and being more self-aware.
Yeah, I find, and I've worked with organisations that only provide feedback at personal development days, or, annual reviews. And so you don't realize that you've done something wrong until your annual review. And I think, well, that's not a way a leader should be, because if they had have been on top of everything, they would have come to me so that I could modify whatever it was that I'd been doing wrong, or fix it, or do something, but to find out, that you may be in at the risk of losing your position because you've done something wrong and not been told. That's a terrible way to run an organization, and a terrible leader, I believe.
Yeah, and it's a terrible feeling, because you think, are they trying to trip me up? Are they trying to do, are they trying to trick me? Do they not like me? And our brains, we go to the negative, and we are more likely to distrust people. You have to actively, think of ways to trust people that might not be acting in ways that seem very trustworthy. Even really trusting people could, go into, what did I do wrong? And then there's this whole rumination, and spending too much time just worried about what mistakes you made, or was it that conversation, or what you wore, or
I've been there so many times, and it's a horrible place to be, because you stop trusting yourself, because you don't, am I going to say something wrong, or am I going to do something wrong? And then I ended up leaving because I just didn't feel comfortable there anymore.
And that goes back to that safety, psychological safety, and physical safety taps into that as well. As human beings, one of the things that is always operating within us that we don't even know is this fear of interpersonal risk. And that is doing or saying the wrong thing, and that we're going to get punished in some way. And we all struggle with that. And so as leaders, being aware of that and knowing that people are worried that they're going to do the wrong thing, or you're going to do the wrong thing to them, is driving their behaviors and either making them positive or negative in how they react. It's really important to create that safe environment. And that's where that model that I showed you taps into creating the safety and connection and shared future. You can't just do one without the other. It's bringing them all together is more powerful. But leaders who are aware of that, and it's like, when people do, you might get a staff member that's really annoying, like, being really angry or being really, offensive. And sometimes it's just that they're scared, and that's their natural reaction. And, this is like a personal thing, but a few years ago, my youngest child was 9, and they developed this fear of spiders. And in summer, going to sleep, it's absolutely fearful for them, because, there's always, well, actually it was all insects, mosquitoes and bees, flies and all that sort of stuff. And they would literally get up in the morning, during the night, like 1 a.m, come into our bedroom and just punch me, like, Mum, I'm scared, there's a spider. And I'd go in, and my husband and I would go in, and we'd look for this spider, and sometimes there wasn't one. But their reaction was to actually blame us and hit us. And then we'd try and convince them to go back to bed. And literally, there was one night where we spent 2 hours arguing with them to go back to bed. And it wasn't like they were being difficult, although it did feel like it at the time. That was just their reaction. It was just being really angry. And, a lot of adults are like that too, but we don't kind of get it.
Yeah, totally. I get that. My son too was a lot younger than that. He was about 2 or 3, but if he heard a fly buzzing against the window, he wouldn't sleep. And we have to, take the fly out of the bedroom. Otherwise, he wouldn't sleep. As soon as he heard a fly buzzing, it was things. So whether he'd been bitten or he'd had a bad dream about a fly, I'm not sure. But this went on for a couple of years. But yeah, we got over it in the end. But yeah, I totally understand it. He used to cry, and he just would not sleep. And it's just some fear that he develops. But yeah, people react to things in different ways.
Yeah. And then, of course, you're exhausted because you've just missed out on lots of sleep. So you're probably a bit cranky. So if you were with a boss that didn't quite get what you were going through and gave you a hard time, it makes life quite miserable for everyone.
Absolutely. Marie Claire, tell me, where can people find your book if they want to read it?
Yes, it's available pretty much everywhere. So you can get it from Amazon or Booktopia. You can get it off my website as well, and Apple Books. It's also available too.
Perfect. And if people want to work with you or find out more about, how to build trust to thrive?
Yeah, so there is, the book actually unpacks as a curriculum for my Trusted Teams Leadership Development Program, and you can find out about that on my website, marieclaireross.com.
Perfect. Have you got any words of wisdom that you'd like to share before we go today?
Yeah, well, my biggest one really is just encouraging leaders. If you do want to create a trusted team culture, and I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you pretty much know that you need to, it's really about self-awareness. That's the foundation of it all. So being really honest and, understanding where you are now and where you want to go and what behaviors that you might need to change. And it could be as simple as, changing your facial expressions when someone comes to you with something that you're not happy about hearing. As human beings, if someone gives us a grumpy look, we, go into that fear and, worry about things. So really reflecting and looking at what you're doing is really helpful. And that's what I find high-performing leaders do.
Yeah, great tip, a great bit of advice as well. Marie-Claire, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing with us about, what makes great leaders and how we can all contribute to the trust in the workplace.
My pleasure, Rose, and thanks for asking such great questions.
You've been listening to Talking with the Experts, hosted by Rose Davidson. Make sure you have a look at our back catalogue over at talkingwiththeexperts.com. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any episode. We look forward to your company next time. Talking with the Experts.